Well, thank you very much. It's very nice to see so many people here after lunch. I know it's often even more difficult to follow a Viking than it is to follow lunch, because if a Viking's following you, you are half awake and running quickly. But after lunch, there always tends to be a little lull in the afternoon. But hopefully you'll find this interesting. So what I want to talk to you about is the cloud computing and how cloud has evolved and is continuing to evolve, and how you can ensure that you're going to be safe as you are using cloud services. One of the things that we've discovered over the years is that there are certainly challenges when it comes to cloud computing. Many organizations who were early adopters of cloud thought that this was going to be wonderful. It was going to change all of their problems. It was going to solve everything. And then after adopting a cloud solution, maybe reviewing it after a year or so, it actually became clear that it didn't solve all of the problems that they had, and it didn't necessarily achieve all of the benefits that they thought it would. I think partly that's because those expectations were unrealistic. They weren't necessarily grounded in reality, or indeed they'd been oversold a service and it didn't quite do what they wanted it to. As the previous poll identified, we still have questions about data access. Who exactly has access to my data when I put it in the cloud? How will I have access, and how will my employees have access to that? Partly, how is adopting the cloud actually going to change the way that we do IT, and how is the IT department going to cope with the fact that the data is off-site and in machines that they don't physically have access or root control for? Also, the legislation. What jurisdiction is my data held in? How will that affect my business, and what does that mean for me? And then also we've got the emerging issue of shadow IT, of services that are being adopted by your employees because they like them, they're nice and shiny, but it's not something that you've given authorization to. It's not something that you've authorized. In fact, it's something that your users are just adopting because they can. All they need is an email address and a credit card, and they can quite merrily sign up to a cloud service without your permission or knowledge about what they're actually doing with it. But I'm convinced that in the future, actually, clouds will be ubiquitous, and more or less everything will be done on cloud. In fact, I firmly believe that we'll be no longer talking about cloud computing in 5 years or so. It'll just be computing, and cloud will be a part of that. It'll be a part of everything, because everything is ultimately going to have some form of business with the cloud or some form of interaction with the cloud. And as devices become smaller, as bandwidth becomes more and more ubiquitous, we've got the 4G networks which are now being rolled out, everything in one way or another, whether you like it or not, is going to be networked and is going to have some kind of cloud connectivity. And we can think of also how devices are going to become increasingly connected to the cloud. I talked about earlier the zombie net of washing machines. I bet that's going to happen. Or at the very least, my washing machine will be talking to my toaster, to my fridge, talking to some kind of cloud-based management system. And this is going to happen, and how are we going to look after this, and what are we going to do about it? And also, another point, the digital native is now entering the workforce. That these are people who have just grown up with the internet. And in fact, everything that they do, they expect to be online. Their private lives, their social lives are now all being conducted online. They're doing their job searches for their first employment online. And when they get into your workforce, they will expect everything to be online, because that is the way they have always lived their life. And they will expect and tend to move towards putting your business data online and some kind of internet service, because they're not thinking twice about it. And how are you actually going to manage this and look after it? We're moving to a world where there isn't just one cloud. In fact, there's many. And they're going to take different types. And the cloud services that we see at the moment are really only the beginning of that. There's going to be clouds based on many, many different architectures, and these clouds are just going to be everywhere. And so you've got to think of how are we going to conduct business and manage our data when we don't necessarily physically have control of it or necessarily know where it is. So how are we going to secure all these clouds with these multiple architectures? What are we actually going to do about it? Well, it's quite interesting that when we ask businesses and we do our cloud survey, we get this, this contradiction between 87% of organizations actually think cloud will improve their security and is actually going to make their organization safer and more secure. Yet at the same time, when they're adopting cloud services, I think quite rightly, security is being seen as their #1 concern. This is the one thing that they are most concerned about in adopting cloud. And the reasons for this are, well, what happens if there's a mass malware outbreak in the cloud provider? Very, very good question. What happens if we have hackers breaking into a cloud service and getting access to my data? How is this data going to be transferred? Is that actually going to be secure? What happens when these digital natives enter the workforce, enter my workplace, adopt some cloud service, and actually I'm breaching the confidentiality of my data, or indeed the regulations, such as the PCI DSS, that this data is subjected to? And what happens in a multi-tenant environment where I have many different users in this cloud environment who may well get access to my data? Indeed, these really are very, very good questions, and these are exactly the type of questions you should be asking when you are considering a cloud environment. Ask these to the providers. But at the same time, I'll flip these questions round and say these are actually very, very relevant to your existing IT systems. These are exactly the same things that are going to happen to your existing IT services. And what, in fact, are you going to do if you get a malware outbreak? What are you going to do if you get a hacker inside your own systems at the moment? Are you more or less secure than a cloud provider? And I think ultimately your choice about whether you choose to adopt cloud computing comes down to one fundamental question, which is the cloud service more or less secure than your current infrastructure? If the answer is my cloud provider is more secure and is better than me, do you want to actually move to the cloud? This is going to bring you advantages. In certain circumstances, if you have a large set of resources, a security department, and your own secure hosting environment, and you have data with very, very high confidentiality or availability requirements, okay, no, maybe that's better done in your own environment. You may be able to better look after this yourself. But my guess is that for the vast, vast majority of business data, you're actually more secure and better off putting it in a cloud environment. The reasons why? Well, we're no longer really winging it when it comes to cloud. We've been doing cloud computing now for many years. We've discovered the pitfalls. We're no longer making things up as we go along. There are very clear standards now on how to secure cloud platforms. We have the Cloud Security Alliance standards for providing controls and securing cloud environments, which in itself is based on the good practices of the ISO 27000 series. So it's not like we don't know how to make cloud secure. We know how to do it now very, very well indeed. There are also extremely strong incentives on securing a cloud environment. Why? Well, we're no longer being an IT department serving one customer, but we're serving many, many customers. And if there is an outage, if something goes wrong, it's not like you can hide it. We'll say, oh, well, you know, we had planned scheduled maintenance, and that's why the email is out for, was it 4 days when you were in Cairo? In a cloud environment, if you have an outage for a minute, the phone rings red hot because you've got all these very angry customers saying, where's my service? I paid for this. And you can be certain behind any outage that you read about in the press, there is a service director whose neck really is on the line. So these things can't be hidden. It's not something you can sweep under the carpet. Lots of people are going to be aware of it. Lots of people are going to be very, very angry indeed. And the person who is in charge of providing this service, you can be sure his head is on the line. And as such, he has an extremely strong incentive to to keep the cloud system running and to keep it secure. But it's also quite interesting when we think actually about the security profession in general. It's a nascent profession, it's a young profession. I'm very pleased indeed that it's a growing profession and there is a growing amount of demand. And when the ISC Squared looks at the provision of information security professionals throughout the world and how this workforce is predicted to grow over time, absolutely wonderful. We see this very clear upward trend in the number of staff who aren't necessarily certified, but who are working in information security and knowledgeable in the domain. Absolutely superb. Same thing in blue within EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Again, we have this growth in trained people who are there to secure your systems. Wonderful news, absolutely superb. But when we look at this line, where are we, beginning of 2013, I reckon there's about 800,000 trained and competent staff within EMEA. But there's 20.8 million companies in the EU alone. If we divide these two numbers, we work out there's actually one information security professional for every 26 companies in the EU. So that means 25 out of 26 companies don't have any information security staff. What are these companies doing? How are they protecting their data? And my guess is within this group, basically, we've got almost the entire SME ecosystem. And what's more, we have some very greedy companies that are taking more than their fair share of information security staff. They don't have one person, they have 100. And every time you read in the paper, it's very good news that the government wishes to hire another 100 information security experts to work in Cheltenham. Absolutely superb. But that's actually 100 companies who are now not going to have their information security person. So I think given this, really the only way that we can have a degree of confidence that we have an information security team watching over our data and keeping it secure from hackers, making sure that it's patched, making sure that the AV is there, monitoring the network for abnormal behavior, is actually by pooling the data together and having it in one place, which is a cloud service. We also have changes in the way that people are working. And as I was putting this presentation together, I found this wonderful illustration of this. I presume this is the author of this particular article, working on her laptop in a cafe. And I think it's evidence that you know when you've been working in information security too long. Well, the first thing I thought where I saw that was, how is she getting the latest updates of her antivirus on her laptop? Equally, we talked about earlier about rogue network points. Are we actually sure that she's connected to the corporate IT through a VPN, or is she going through a rogue network access point which is sniffing her traffic? Equally, she's chosen to do her work in an environment which is pleasing for her. Absolutely wonderful. Why not? Writing an article on the laptop. What's going to happen to all that hard work that she's put in when inevitably the laptop gets lost, gets left on the bus, gets left in the cafe, gets stolen? Where are we going to re-find and restore this information? And I think the only way that you're going to be able to secure these types of users is actually through the cloud. In that we can work all you like on the endpoint device, but that endpoint device is going to be authenticated into a cloud environment, and that work and that value she's creating is actually going to the cloud where it is properly protected, where it is properly secured. So where actually are we in cloud at the moment during 2012? We conduct our State of Cloud survey every year, where we query people throughout the world, organizations of all sizes, where are they with their adoption of cloud and where do they see cloud going? And we do quite clearly see that organizations are fully embracing cloud. We have 89% of organizations worldwide that at the very least are discussing cloud, are thinking of moving their systems into the cloud. And when it comes to utilizing cloud services, so services which are provided by cloud providers, we have 93% of organizations who at the very least are discussing that. And the top cloud services that they are considering is their email management security, of doing email through the cloud, doing their backup and storage in the cloud, and also having their security management delivered from the cloud. But there's a few things which aren't quite right. I take a lot of comfort from the fact that people are, at the very least, evaluating the cloud and looking to see whether that provides them with what they need. But when we actually ask them, are you following any procedures for actually evaluating in a controlled manner what you're adopting within the cloud, we get this very mixed response. So we've only got 14% who are saying that they always follow procedures when looking at cloud and cloud initiatives. So this is actually a pitifully small number. 32% are often following procedures. We've got 38 who are neutral, and then we've got, where are we, 40, 50, 54% who basically aren't following procedures. Well, this is why we get to the point that we've got the disappointments of the cloud. The problem is people aren't actually evaluating whether the cloud services that they're adopting are meeting their needs. If you're going to have success in a cloud environment, you need to establish in advance what it is that you wish the cloud service to provide to you. And if you have established this and put it within a framework, there you have a method for when you are looking at cloud provision, you can decide, does this meet my needs or not? Otherwise, you're going to be at the whims of the salesman of saying, yeah, the cloud's wonderful, it'll solve all your problems, it'll be amazing. But unless you define in advance what it is that you wish to achieve, you are only setting yourself up for failure. So please, 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 have a plan, have your objectives decided in advance. Then you can ask the correct questions, then you can get the services that are going to meet your needs. At the same time, we have this issue of the rogue cloud, that not only are companies not really thinking about why they're adopting cloud, but we have individuals within the organization, employees no doubt very well-meaning, who wish to achieve their objectives that their managers have set them, who are enthusiastically embracing cloud services. That's what they use at home. They love it. It's easy. All you need is an email address and a credit card. And so they're enthusiastically signing up for these cloud services, thinking that they're wonderful, and we see this shift towards the right of this graph of organizations saying, you know, where are we, 79% or so saying that the rogue use of cloud is either staying the same or becoming more of an issue. And indeed, I can remember one conversation that we had with a very large organization where they came to us and said, well, we think it's probably about time we started thinking about the cloud, which is wonderful, great. And one of our technical staff said, well, let's have a look at your DNS logs, and actually found that the organization was already using 44 different cloud providers, even though they were only now thinking about moving to the cloud. They did not know they were already massively using the cloud. Their employees love it. But does this use actually fit the needs of the organizations and their requirements for the security of that data? Because we have issues in terms of compliance, and whether that's PCI DSS or other compliance standards that are required for the data, and with this data which has certain standards associated with it, it can be difficult to show that a cloud service actually meets those needs. So we have 49% who are showing they're actually concerned about whether their cloud services that they are using are actually meeting their compliance requirements, and 53% are having issues with proving that. Even though they believe that the cloud is meeting their needs, they're not necessarily able to prove that. And again, this comes back to specifying what you need within the cloud service. If the data that you want to put in the cloud has compliance problems or issues associated with it, it's something you need to ask the cloud provider. If I give you my data, can you show me that it'll meet my needs? Give me the documentary proof. 23% are saying they've actually been fined for privacy violations. in having data in the cloud. This was data that should not have been in the cloud or should have been better protected in the cloud, and they're falling foul of regulatory authorities because they're not applying the procedures, they're not asking the right questions. We also have issues with EDiscovery. 66% are missing deadlines for EDiscovery. What is EDiscovery? It's when a lawyer asks you, give me this information, or give me everything that you know, that you have in electronic format relating to this issue. Sooner or later, it'll happen to you. 34% of the respondents have had EDiscovery requests for data which was in the cloud. 66% are actually missing their deadlines because of that. And 41% are actually saying that they're unable to fulfill requests, legal requests to find their data because they don't necessarily know where it is or they can't get it back from the cloud. I have a friend who's a lawyer who specializes in contract law, business contract law. And the first thing that he says whenever he gets involved in an issue is no longer, show me the contract. It's show me all the emails in which the contract was actually changed. Because you're going to get a contract, a written contract, but then the next thing that happens is, someone says, oh, well, can you fit this in, or can we change that? And the guy says, yeah, no problem. Or can you do this additionally? Yeah, sure, of course we can. Or no, we can't quite do that. And so any contract now has this whole list of amendments which are being made within email, and which if you can't find those emails where everything has been discussed and been negotiated and decided, when there's an issue, and the lawyers get involved, you then can't find that information. So you need to make sure everything that you're putting in the cloud, you can actually find that data and you know what data is there and you know what you can get back. Because 68% are actually having issues when it comes to restoring data from the cloud. Even though they've signed up for cloud backup solutions, they may well be able to put that data in the cloud, or at the very least put that data somewhere. But when it comes to getting the data back again, they're finding that it's difficult. And of course, it's the old IT adage, it's not a backup unless you've tested the restore. Exactly the same thing is true in the cloud environment. If you're backing up, if you're storing data in the cloud, you need to make sure that you can actually get it back again. Because if you can't, well, it's actually not a backup. The same thing, we have these complex backup environments which are becoming evident. We've got 61% who are using this mix and match of physical backup, virtual backup, and cloud backup, and actually managing that and making sure that they're still in control of their data is actually becoming an issue. So again, if we're looking to store data in the cloud, God's sake, make sure you can actually get it back again and test that regularly so you know that you're in control of your data. What it all comes down to is basically, if you want to have a safe cloud, you need to do 4 things. You need to protect the policy, but of course, as part of that, you need to have the policy in place first. You need to know what it is that you're trying to achieve so that you can make sure that the provider is meeting those needs. Fundamentally, the driver is about protecting the information and the security requirements associated with that information. As part of that, we also need to protect the people and individuals who are accessing that information, and of course also making sure that they really are the people who you think they are. There's a wonderful example that you may have read a couple of months ago where a programmer who was working remotely had actually managed to outsource his job, and it wasn't him who was accessing the cloud environment. In fact, it was the subcontractor that he'd given his second two-party authentication token to in China, who was accessing the data on his behalf. And how do you actually assure that with your own data, that the people who you think are accessing your data really are who you think they are? Part of this, again, protecting your infrastructure, making sure that that data, when it's in transit, when it's under your control, is actually secure. And these are all things that Symantec does. These are all the types of things that we can help you with. Our success drivers, if you are going to be successful within a cloud environment, Number one thing, a data policy. This is what must drive this activity. Know what it is that you want to achieve. You need to know what a safe cloud would actually look like. You know, what is it that we want to do? What does safe mean to us? Do we really want it to be absolutely 100% safe from hackers? If so, how do we establish that? How could the provider prove to us that we're meeting our criteria and needs for safe? And on the basis of that, we need to be able to evaluate anything that we're deciding that we're going to move to against our criteria for what safe is. And one of the positives of this is actually we can then look at the rogue cloud environment that when one of our users decides that they're going to use this cloud service, it may well be that that service meets their needs and meets the business needs. But we won't know unless we've got a set of criteria. And then we can look at this rogue service that someone's signed us up to and go through and check it against our criteria. And it may well be, yeah, this service, this is great. We should have gone with this earlier. Why didn't we? Great, now we're going to adopt it. Or it might be, whoa, this is really, really not what we need to do. And these are the reasons why. And this is why we're going to go to the user and say, no, you can't use that, I'm afraid. Why don't you use this safer alternative? As a brief aside, I had a discussion with a security officer a few weeks ago who works within a hospital, and one of the clinical staff was using an insecure file sharing system to actually take home the clinical data so he could work on it in the evening. And he was saying, well, how do we combat that? And you have to say, well, look, this does not meet your criteria of the data policy. Therefore, you need to go to this person and say, look, this is absolutely unacceptable because it doesn't meet our policy. It does not meet our requirements for a safe cloud. Therefore, we're going to block this because this is not a safe way of doing it. However, we have found this safe alternative, which means you can share files within different environments, and it does meet our criteria. Use this one instead. Having the policy, having the criteria means that you stay in control of these discussions and you stay in control of the data. You definitely need to enable users to access cloud functionality because they're going to use it. It's going to happen. Make sure you stay in control of the situation. Make sure that you are encouraging the use of safe clouds. You know, if a user really wants to do it, they're going to do it anyway. So you might as well make sure that it's safe. Those services that you do identify that are unsafe, block them. Block them at the DNS level. Put in your filtering of your network. Make it difficult for your users to do the wrong thing and make it easy for them to do the right thing. Because, as I say, they are using the cloud whether you like it or not. Because they're used to, because it meets their needs for getting their job done. So within Symantec, we have 3 different models and 3 different product stands for moving to the safe cloud. We offer many of our security products as a service of management of security through the cloud, which you can consume as users. We also offer products to help build clouds and help organizations build their own cloud infrastructures and keep that secure and resilient and with high availability. And then we also offer means to extend into the cloud and to actually manage the adoption of cloud services and manage the log-on, so your users are only logging on once and can access many third parties through that single sign-on service. So this is what we're doing within Symantec. We're here downstairs, so please come and have a chat with us. And with that, I shall thank you very much for your time. And I believe we're taking questions later. Thank you.